Welcome to Lightworkers, where sustainable living meets sustainable music. Lightworkers is a show that features people in the Caribbean who are involved in renewable energy, sustainability, and innovation. Whether they're in government, private industry, academia, or the arts, if they're involved in sustainability, we cover it. In this segment of Lightworkers, we feature Hugo Hodge Jr., the CEO of Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority. We take time to learn about Hugo's history and learn about Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority's projects around sustainability and renewable energy for the Virgin Islands. Who is Hugo Hodge?
Well, Hugo Hodge Jr. would be me. Born and raised in the Virgin Islands in St. Thomas. Graduated from Charlotte Marley High School. Left here in 1987 to attend college in Atlanta, Georgia, went to Georgia Tech. Studied mechanical engineering. Co-op with Georgia Power for 5 years. Wanted to do a profession that I could come back home with eventually. Had like 3 interviews for co-op jobs. One was oil rig in the Gulf, a jet engine company, and the power company utility in Georgia, and knowing that I couldn't make jet engines in the Virgin Islands or go out in a rig, I chose one that I could come back to eventually and possibly contribute in some way. Definitely wanted to live home. Islands to the roots, so I had to get back. I worked up there. Actually, I left school my senior year. Pursued. I didn't think the average or the normal route to get to where I am today. I got a record deal, sang reggae, had a band.
So hold on, you're a reggae singer?
Reggae singer, left school, did that for a while. Eventually came home to work with the power company after Hurricane Marilyn. And then immediately after, around April of '96, went back up to Atlanta to get some work in the industry and finish school. Took a job at Marietta Power as a dispatcher, so I can go to school during the day. Took a 3 to 11 shift, got some promotions, ended up giving me an opportunity to go back to school. The company let me go to school during the day, kept me on the clock, and then get my bachelor's in mechanical engineering. Went back, got my MBA. Left Marietta after about 8 years, went to Griffin Power, ran that utility for about 3 years before returning home in 2008.
So there's not many engineers I know who get an MBA after they get their degree in engineering. So what was your thinking at the time to get an MBA after you got your mechanical engineering degree?
I'll be honest, the thought process was not probably the most sound at first. I had the job. I had put in for a promotion to be the special projects engineer to handle all the major projects for the utility in Marietta. Going through the process, kind of got what I thought was a raw deal in a promotion. I had gotten 7 promotions in about 7 years at that point. Well, I think that was early on, 5 in 5 years at that point. So I got used to getting everything I put in for. This one, I don't know if I was getting too high for where the perception was that I was going to end up. So when I didn't get it, and I didn't think it was handled appropriately, I just thought about what I can do to further myself and be able to progress. I had thought about going to business school, but the day that they decided that I didn't get the job, I was kind of upset. Went to my office. About 2-3 months later, the person they did hire left immediately, and they gave me those responsibilities for the promotion, in addition to what I was doing already, for the same salary. I was obligated, as they had given me time to go to school. I owed them years of service in exchange, so I couldn't go anywhere for 2 more years. So I decided the best thing to do was get my MBA in those 2 years. I took the GMAT, scored like 600 and something, went ahead and started my MBA program at Georgia State University and graduated right as my obligation expired to the company.
So when you got your MBA, were you looking to be an entrepreneur? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because there's so many youth watching this show, and sometimes when they think about the CEO of a power company, they're thinking that possibly it's something that is outside of their reach. And so I just want to understand what the roadmap was in your life and your thinking as to what you were going to do that brought you where you are today. So, could you talk about that MBA and the entrepreneurship aspect?
No, entrepreneur was not the immediate goal for me. I know eventually I'd want to do my own business. I know I'll do some consulting sometime later on, and the MBA would be important then, but I realized early on that bachelors in any discipline, where engineering is when you can go straight to the marketplace and work right away, and some others require a master's. We're getting to the point now where a bachelor's is almost like having a high school diploma. It's just not good enough to progress you to the highest levels if that's what your ambitions are. So I know I needed an MBA for the latter years when I want to do retire and do some entrepreneurial type activities. But even before that, if I wanted to be the head of a department, much as an agency, I would need those other credentials. So I wanted to get it then.
Okay. So the hurricane happened and you came down to the Virgin Islands, and how was it that you became the CEO of the power companies?
It's funny because when I was a summer student, I also had some stints at Water and Power Authority as a summer student. I'd always tell them, you better include me and stuff because I'm going to come back and run this place one day. And some of the employees are here now and they laugh about those conversations. But when the hurricane passed, Hurricane Marilyn, and my first kid was born the following February, and I didn't want to leave St. Thomas. So I went to one of my mentors, Mr. Francois, and I asked him. He was head of engineering at the Water and Power Authority then, and I asked him, "Just, I'm only 2 quarters from my engineering degree. Just let me stay here as an engineer, and I'll work and give everything I have. I'll never disappoint you for giving me this opportunity." And he told me, "You could run this place one day. You need to go back and finish school." And so he wouldn't give me the job I was looking for, but he gave me some of the best advice.
So he believed in you early, and I think that that's the running thread amongst people who are very successful, is that they had people who mentored them at the beginning of their careers or at some point in their careers, and because of that mentorship, it caused them to be catapulted to where they are today. And so, it definitely shows that people don't do it by themselves.
Yeah, mentorship is important. I mean, no man is an island, so you have to have some person or people that are going to influence you in a positive manner. And who you choose for that mentorship, and who you choose for advice, and even who you choose as friends and acquaintances play a significant role in where you're going to end up and what you're going to be.
So let's fast forward. We'll get back to the mentorship, but when did you know that you were going to become the CEO of WAPA in real terms?
In real terms, honestly, I came home in May of 2007 for a funeral, and a real close friend of mine had passed. Came home, sitting with the family, his family, and he has family members that are in politics here, and we're at the family having dinner and just talking, and one of them come to me and said, "You're doing pretty good things up there in Georgia. You're running a utility. How big is it?" So we go through the size of the company. Griffin Power is about the 6th largest municipal in Georgia. When I worked for, was the largest in Georgia where I worked for before, and probably comparable in size to the Virgin. It's a little bit larger, more industrial customers, but customer base and megawatts of load about the same as the entire Virgin Islands combined. And they're like, Mr. Bruno Vega is retiring. So I had no idea yet.
That was the previous CEO.
Correct. So I said, "Well, do you have a resume or whatnot?" I was like, "Yeah, I have one." So I submitted it to the board chair. I received a call from a headhunter that was actually doing the search, the national search for WAPA. He invited me to do a phone interview first. I told everybody involved, I know they're going to do a phone interview, and then they'll do an interview probably somewhere up in the mainland, since they were doing a national search. And they'll do a follow-up interview probably in the Virgin Islands. I knew it was going to be at least 3 or 4 interviews. But I knew once I made it to the second cut to get down to the Virgin Islands for that final interview, it's going to be hard not to choose me, because I was going to make it very hard on them.
So what was your position before you came to WAPA?
I was a director of the utility in Griffin, Georgia. Okay. So I was running the utility there.
Running utility. So what year was this when you officially became the CEO of WAPA in the Virgin Islands?
January 1 of 2008.
Okay. So it's been, you're heading on, 4 years?
Almost 4 years.
Right.
3 years, 10 months. plus.
So you're the CEO of a Caribbean utility. Can you tell us about some of the challenges that a Caribbean utility faces in comparison to a utility, let's say, stateside?
Well, Caribbean utilities are probably the most challenging type of utility you're going to find. You're insular, which means you're on an island system. There's nobody to help you. There's no grid. There's no neighboring state that can give you assistance. For example, I worked in Georgia. There are several utilities in Georgia. There are several generating power plants. They're large power plants. They're 1,500, 2,000 megawatt plants. In the event you have a problem with one of your facilities, you can buy power from a neighboring state.
It also has an economy of scale.
Correct.
So it's cheaper price.
So it's much cheaper. With a grid system, you make a decision as to whether you could buy or produce cheaper, and you base your decision on that. I was what you call a long company, which means I had more generation than I would use. So I would sell excess on the grid, and I sold most of my excess power to Florida. Florida is a buying state because they have made some decisions. They stopped coal plants and they did different things. So they have more natural gas plants, so they buy off the grid for a large part. In the Caribbean, there's no grid. So when I have a unit go down here and they're mechanical, man-made items, they're gonna have scheduled and non-scheduled outages. And when they trip, there's no neighboring state I can buy energy from. It's down. Either you have enough spinning reserve to keep the lights on, or you put another unit on with a backup unit. There's no spare units. You gotta get something fixed and get the power back on. So it's a little different scenario. A lot of folks leave the Caribbean and go to large, big cities. They go to New York City, or they go to LA, or they go to Miami, and those cities have underground systems, not just underground systems, but big network systems, meaning that there's 4 times the power needed in a network grid. So there's very little outages you'll find in those areas. But if you go to the suburbs, you'll see the same outages that you may see in an island. You have squirrels in Georgia that cause more outages than you will ever imagine. The same way iguanas cause outages down here. So you just don't have the flexibility on the generation side on an island that you would have elsewhere. Plus, they're small systems. St. Thomas, St. John peaks at 80 megawatts. St. Croix peaks at 50 megawatts. And we're pretty large in the Caribbean. Nevis peaks at 9 megawatts. St. Kitts, 25 megawatts. Anguilla around 16, 18 megawatts. These are real small systems, so you don't have the opportunity for the 1,500 megawatt power plant to bring the cost down. You got to use the 1.5 and the 2 and the 5 and the 10 megawatt units that you can ramp up and ramp down all day. So the cost is much higher, and the units that come in those increments are all burning units. So the entire Caribbean, unless they have something indigenous to them, like Trinidad has natural gas, and you may have geothermal in Guadalupe, one of those places, and you may have hydro in certain places. Everybody is on oil, and it's very expensive. When oil was $10 a barrel, it wasn't a problem. Now it's 110, and it's a big significant problem.
Right. So I know that there have been a lot of conversations amongst different heads of utilities, and specific, there was a conference recently of Carolic, which is a consortium of all the utilities companies, and they were getting together talking about their unique problems and the prices. And I think that there's a lot of conversation in the Virgin Islands about the price of energy here being around 44 cents per kilowatt hour, and a lot of people thinking that that's the highest in the Caribbean. And when I went to the conference, I spoke to many utilities people, and actually the Virgin Islands is not unique in terms of the high price and that price point, and the price being based on oil. Recently I was talking to some people in Bermuda, and they were saying that the price per kilowatt hour in Bermuda is 50 cents per kilowatt hour. And of course, they have a higher median income, per capita median income, around $78,000, so they can deal with it a lot better than people in the Virgin Islands. However, the price is still very high Caribbean-wide. Could you please talk about the price ranges within the Caribbean, and why some places are cheaper than others, and why some places are more expensive than others?
Okay. Yeah, and In the Caribbean, for the most part, one of my counterparts in Anguilla, Thomas Hodge, does a spreadsheet on a monthly basis with all the prices of the region. We all collaborate on getting all the data together. And usually we're within 2 or 3 cents of each other. We're normally right in the middle of the pack, which is actually better than would be expected, because we have to actually buy more expensive oil than everybody else because of our EPA regulation and whatnot.
Yeah, because you talk about the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is a agency within the federal government, and they have certain mandates on the type of fuel that you can use, and it affects the price. So could you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the EPA mandates that we burn low sulfur, low nitrogen content fuel oil. They give us permits based on what they want the emissions to be. As a matter of fact, we have to burn the sweetest crude, the low sulfur crude here, 0.03% sulfur and 0.05% sulfur by district, just depending on what the emissions is. 0.03 in St. Croix, 0.05 in St. Thomas. And those are more expensive grades of oil than just diesel, which some of the islands can burn diesel. They can burn slow speed diesels that actually have more emissions, but they're more efficient. So they get the trade-off of a lower price because they run more efficiently. And your fuel cost is a function of not only the price of fuel, it's a function of your efficiency of your units as well, and the units you have available. So even here where we have our fuel adjustment clause is called the LEAC, it's the Levelized Energy Adjustment Clause. And how it's calculated on a quarterly basis is you project the price of fuel for the next 3 months. It's filed 45 days before the next period. You project that price of fuel. You also project which units are going to be available, how efficient they're going to operate. There's a factor called a heat rate, which tells you how efficient they're going to run. And you project the load, because a unit runs its most efficiently at its maximum output. Whenever you have to turn that unit down, you get less efficient. So your heat rate goes up. So you burn more fuel for the same amount of energy. So you have to figure out all these things, and based on projections for the most part, and have a true up at the end of the period. I have an exercise for my staff where they do these projections on a monthly basis, so that when you get to the one that really counts for the LEAC, you have historical data as to how you've been doing with your projections, with plus, minus, and whatnot, so you can make the necessary adjustments.
So within that, the price of oil and its volatility is taken into account, correct?
Yeah, and that's the big hamper, right? And most people in the Caribbean that are complaining, and you asked earlier about the fact that some people think it's just the Virgin Islands. What I learned from the CEOs around the region is everybody on that island believe it's just that island. Right. So if they live on Barbados, they believe it's just Barbados. If they live on Grenada, they believe it's just Grenada, because that's what you have that's your reality. But we're all going through the same struggle, and it's unfortunate. But I'll give you an example. The day I took the position in 2008, oil was $92 a barrel. By the 13th of January, it hit $100 a barrel. It went as high as 147 that summer. The next winter, it dropped down as low as 40. It's back up. I'm paying $117 this month, $118 this month per barrel. It's just so volatile. But in 2002, it was $22 a barrel. So when folks are talking about how much the rate has changed, our fuel cost is 70% of the total bill. Right. We actually get 30 cents of the dollar to run the entire business on. That's payroll, debt service, capital projects, equipment, that come out of 30 cents. 70 cents of every dollar we get and pass on to our provider, and we get no use of for the utility. So you start at 22 cents in 2002. Right. It takes you 5 years, 2007, to double. Yeah. And then it takes you 18 months to triple. Right. So that's a dynamic that's just overwhelming for any consumer. Right.
So yeah, when people talk about the price of oil, the point that I wanted to make is I don't think that the full price of oil is even added up in terms of all the different price points for oil and what oil causes in terms of some of the health problems that oil causes. So I think that, when we talk about the price of oil, the real expense of oil is not really added up. and that's just an aside that I wanted to make. A lot of people do talk about, well, why is it that Trinidad has such cheap price of gasoline, or the price of oil so cheap in Trinidad? What is the reason for Trinidad having such a better price than we have in the Virgin Islands, let's say?
Well, Trinidad has a refinery, yes, but they have production. They have wells, they have natural gas indigenous to them. Okay. So the refinery is only for export. And they have natural gas that they dig and they explore and they utilize, and they also put in the market and sell. But natural gas is 1/4 the price of oil, 1/6.
So it's really their natural gas that takes down their prices.
Correct, and it's theirs. Right. So actually, I think the government actually subsidizes the cost for the citizens, since they send it abroad and make money as well. So the price down there is dirt cheap for energy, and anything gas related is very cheap there on Trinidad. They have something indigenous to them that works. The French islands have a low price point, not because they have something indigenous, but because the French government subsidizes all the French colonies. So everybody in France pays a tax on their bill.
We're talking about Guadeloupe, Martinique.
Correct. That brings their cost down. So every colony of France pays the same price that the citizens in France pay. So that's a benefit they have. It's not because they do things differently or they are more ingenious. They just happen to have the benefit of that kind of a subsidy.
So, Hugo, you talked about WAPA, and let's talk a little bit more about WAPA and how WAPA operates. You do have the 9 bosses that you talked about.
Correct.
What is the PSC, the Public Services Commission?
That's our regulator, and the regulator has a role of setting rates. So we provide to them the data, the background, the whatever documentation we need to justify the request. They analyze it with their consultants, and then they determine what the actual rate is going to be. It's not normal in the U.S. for a public utility to be regulated. Usually it's investor-owned utilities. We're one of maybe 3 or 4 in the whole country that's regulated, and that includes Guam and Puerto Rico and whatnot. It's probably the best structure for us here in the territory. So it is how it is right now. But most municipal power companies set their own rates. The industry is one that's actually self-regulated. You're encouraged by virtue of your customers or your employees are your customers as well, and you have to find the best possible, lowest possible rate for the community by virtue of your business. The price of energy here is killing the economy, and you have it's tough for businesses to make it, tough for people to make decisions on how they provide for their families and homes. So we have to get off dependency on oil as soon as possible.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that struck me when I first met you, Hugo, is that I was not expecting the CEO of any power company to be saying that we need to get off the dependency on oil. And so I thought you were a very interesting person. That's why I wanted to interview you, because I thought you had a perspective that a lot of people aren't expecting. So basically, you're looking for different ways to be able to provide electricity to the public without using oil if you don't have to.
Correct.
What you mentioned, the consumers. I see you in the community. I seen you at Carnival. I seen you. People know who you are. What are you hearing from people? I know it's prices. There's outages. We talked about prices, and we're going to talk about some of the solutions of price. Can we talk about outages and what the outages are about?
Yeah, it's a mixture. I mean, I hear it all. I hear from proud to have you back home to myths and fairy tales, and there's a lot of false information around the community. I guess when you don't know, you just make it up, and if it sounds good enough, people roll with it. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. I had somebody say yesterday that 60% of the WAPA cost is organizational, operational costs, which is unbelievable that somebody could even have that concept still, when it's the other way. 70% is fuel-related costs. But an outages come in a wide variety. Like I talked earlier about generation-related outages, units that have not been maintained the way they should have been maintained because of a cash shortfall, whether it's from the non-payment or the slow payment of the government to other various problems that have occurred over the years, you have that deterioration of equipment when they're not maintained the way they're supposed to. As you have cash shortfalls, you're going to pay your fuel supplier, you're going to pay your debt service, and you're going to pay your payroll, and everything else is going to suffer. Whether it's vendors, local vendors, or your maintenance is the first thing you usually hit. So it plays a role in your reliability. In addition to that, you have a lot of trees. We have some trees that are kind of endangered or protected. The mahogany trees, you have to get permission before you can trim them. And when a limb falls, it takes a line with it. When a iguana gets up and part of her body is in one line and it's another line, it causes an arc. There you go, that's all.
And that is because infrastructurally, WAPA's lines are above ground?
Correct, for the most part, overhead. We got a lot of underground projects. Just finished Christiansted, St. Croix Phase 1, about to do Phase 2 in Christiansted. We're getting ready to mobilize on Main Street's underground project. We're going to do Cruz Bay, we're going to do Frederickstead. A lot of FEMA-funded projects, mitigation projects. The problem with hazard mitigation projects is you have to actually have the damage before you get the funding to mitigate it. So it's not before. You have to actually have it's after the fact. But it still comes in handy to get the funding to do those mitigation projects.
Sure. So that's what you're hearing on the street, and some people I know when they're writing their WAPA check feel like they're writing a check to Hugo Hodge. And I've heard those things, and I've heard that people are taking a lot of this stuff personally. And I've had actually the pleasure of teaching a course on renewable energy and energy efficiency here in Virgin Islands, and a lot of people came to the course not because they're tree huggers concerned about the environment. They came because of their pocket. They came because of their WAPA bill. And we entered into a lot of conversations, and there's a few things that came out of the conversations. And one of the things I would always say to the students, particularly the ones who are protesting the most, is that, well, what would you do if you were the CEO of WAPA tomorrow? You would still have to buy oil. You would still have to deal with the infrastructure that exists. There are a lot of things that you're going to inherit. It's about what are you going to place your priorities to fix. And when I put it that way to them, that they knew that they would still have to buy oil, a lot of them started thinking a little bit more. And then I got into some energy efficiency issues with them. So for instance, clothes dryer takes up about 10%, 10 to 12% of someone's electricity bill. And I'm saying, well, you live in the sun, you live in the sunshine. And if you're not using solar energy to dry your clothes, why are you expecting WAPA to use solar energy at all? So there's some responsibility that all of us have to take around energy efficiency. There's responsibility that definitely WAPA has to make life better for everybody in terms of our electricity usage and our electricity rate, because at the end of the day, we all know that electricity bills and the cost of energy is an economic driver or an economic non-starter.
Correct.
Because the word that everyone hates is stagflation, where the price of energy goes up so much that the price of everything else goes up, and then your economy comes to a standstill. So you're in a very serious position to really do some positive things for this community, the business people and the residential people as well, customers of WAPA. Let's talk about some of the programs and initiatives that you've taken to be a problem solver, because we can talk about problems all day long, and most people know what the problems are, whether they're living in the Virgin Islands, they're living in Jamaica, whether they're living in the Bahamas, whether they're living in St. Kitts, wherever they're living. What are some of the solutions that you've put on the table in your capacity as a CEO of WAPA?
Well, I guess from 2 years ago, we put on our first solution on the table. It was a waste to energy project. Got a lot of controversy in the area as it was waste to energy coupled with petroleum coke for the base load resources. Turned out it was going to be a 30% reduction in emissions because of the controls you can put on this plant versus what you have existing. But you had a lot of people that spoke up with a lot of misinformation, and the misinformation killed the project. And it's unfortunate because it was a very good deal for the territory. We would have gotten rid of 40% of our peak reliability on oil and reduced the emissions by 30% all in the same sweep. Since then, we put our RFP for solar energy. We've received 27 bids. We're evaluating them right now. There's some very good bids in there. We got about 10 megawatts of solar out of that project. There's a 0.5 megawatt project at the airport that's in service right now for solar. There's anemometry for wind to record the wind data, as you have to have wind data before you can talk to a wind company. The anemometry will be erected here within the next 30 days, and then within about 6 months we'll be going out to procure for wind power. There's an interconnection with Puerto Rico. It's not to change our dependence to Puerto Rico, but it's to add some flexibility, give us a mechanism which we can buy if we need to, improve our reliability, improve the price point, while giving the chance to maintain and better maintain our equipment. And we have another resource in the event we need to divert some load in a different direction. It's getting national recognition, been endorsed by the Secretary of State of the U.S. The Secretary of Energy has endorsed the project. I received a call from the Secretary of State's office. I thought one of my friends playing a trick. He said, but it turned out to be genuine. She mentioned our project in a speech as a result of the conversations we had.
Hillary Clinton.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. We're examining the possibility of converting to natural gas, LNG, which will significantly reduce our costs. We're converting our water production from a thermal process to reverse osmosis, which is about half the production cost. The contract is already signed for St. Thomas, almost finished with St. Croix's contract as well. We've reduced line loss in the territory from St. Thomas from about 10 to 6.5%. In St. Croix from about 14 to about 10.5%. Significant reductions in line loss. In St. Croix, we're putting in the first transmission circuit of 69 kV. Just rebuilt the existing substation, made a provision for 69 kV, putting a new substation in the middle of the island, which will now distribute to the western part of the island, halfway rather than the entire length of the island from Christiansted. It's just so many initiatives we got going on right now. There's an AMI project where we're going to put automatic meter infrastructure so we can do remote reading, disconnect, reconnect, know when theft is existing. It's a state-of-the-art system. It's a GIS project we're doing. We've completely GIS mapped the entire.
Explain GIS.
The geographic positional system where you have the coordinates for where everything is.
Like the geographic imaging system.
Correct. Well, what you do now is our mapping system will have the functionality of interface with the customer. When a customer calls in and says they're out of power, it'll show up on the maps. It'll highlight where the areas are. If you get 4 customers calling from an area, it'll show us the switches that possibly could be the mode of failure. You'll be able to get automation on the grid, which means before we leave the house to come in to respond to an outage, the devices would talk to each other. This one would see a fault, talk to this one, they'll open up, isolate the area, put everybody's power back on before you even leave the house.
So Hugo, I wanted to get back to the Puerto Rico interconnection study that was done. It's had its detractors. It's had people who felt that there are some problems with it, particularly in the laying of the cables, that they felt it was going to be way too expensive for it to be feasible to have any type of positive cut in costs for electricity here. Could you address that?
Yeah, you know, we have a unbelievable amount of people that always have find a way to criticize every endeavor or every possible mode of change. This is a necessity we have to do. If we're going to make any major change to our grid, there has to be a mechanism where you can take units offline and get the work done. A natural gas conversion will require an ability to take multiple units off at once through the conversion. If you do it one at a time, the cost will kill you. So you have to look at the entire need of the system. A grid system allows you the flexibility to do just that. You can take half of your grid off and make the modifications because you have another supplier at that time. There's enough of a price difference between here and Puerto Rico that can absorb the cost of the cable and still provide a savings to the consumer. It's actually one of the false misinformation statements that are out there. It's unfortunate. You know, if we spend more time in our community using the S word for solutions and sustainability rather than scapegoats and you know, problems, we'll have a better outcome here in the territory. We have to come together and rather than pointing the finger at another, using that energy towards focusing on real, true, sustainable solutions. You know.
Well, I think that's a good point. And what I've found is that I do meet people who are detractors and are very much against the utility companies. But I do find you to be very accessible. And I always ask them, well, have you called Hugo and tried to talk to him about this? And invariably, the answer has been no. So some of the misinformation, I think a lot of it could be dealt with, quite frankly, by just giving you a call. And I'm not sure why some people haven't, to compare their numbers and to compare some of their different findings and to see what's real, what's not real. And I think that's one of the reasons why I want to institute university debate series. So some of these issues that have to do with energy can be debated publicly. The detractors and the supporters can come out and share their information with the public, and for it to be an educational process. And I know that you said that you're interested in something like that as we move along. So I don't want this interview to be the end of it, to show that, well, there are problems happening that's region-wide, actually worldwide, in terms of energy. And the question is, how are we going to work together in conversations and dialogues to understand what are the real issues, what are the solutions, what's the feasibility, who's done these studies, who's qualified, who's done these studies, and also what are the best practical solutions that can be taken from the political level, economic level, and also from the social level.
And you have some people that question the need for the study. They say there's too many studies, let's just do something. But the truth is that we have very small systems. We look at the news and we see a 50 megawatt project in Texas, so we believe that 50 megawatt wind project is something that's feasible. Well, the entire system of St. Croix is 50 megawatts, you know. So when you look at the magnitude and the size of the system, we're putting a 10 megawatt solar system in the Virgin Islands. That's about 8% of our peak demand. That's unheard of. There's no place putting in 8 to 10% of their system in solar. This is, you know, we're breaking barriers here with some of the efforts we have. But when we hear the number and we hear 10 megawatts, it sounds small, but you have to put it in the context of the entire size of the system. When you hear about the plans for like 7.5 megawatts of wind, 10 megawatts of solar, 16 megawatts of waste energy, you're talking about some 30% of your generation by renewable power. We have a goal here in the territory of 60% change from business as usual by 2025. That's an unbelievable goal that we have put upon ourselves. It's been signed by the governor through our partnership with the EDIP program. And the EDIP program is the Energy Development in Island Nations. We won this designation. This was something that we had to compete for with all the other islands, particularly the U.S. islands, but then some of the other Caribbean islands were also in the play as well. They came here to interview the government, myself, the energy office, and they found that this was the place that had the attitudes and the drive to get it done. So everybody else around the region and the country sees the special things that are going on here. It's to get our own to see it, you know, and that's the tough part. The tough part is where you have the human side to everybody in the Water Power Authority. We have children that look at TV and read the paper and read the blogs, and the stuff that's said there, it's unfortunate your children have to read that stuff, but you give your heart, blood, and soul to the company. My son stops me in the driveway when we're leaving the house and tells me, stop here, let's talk here, because once we leave here, you belong to everybody else. My child shouldn't have to think like that, but it's reality, you know, so we'll get there though.
Right, and the fact is that WAPA employees have to pay electricity bills
Full price.
So they have to pay full price. So everybody in interest that this gets addressed. And I think what's interesting what you said, when you talk about the 10 megawatt solar, Some of the detractors have said, well, that's only going to put a dent into the full load of WAPA. But what you're actually talking about is the percentage of penetration of solar into the WAPA system is actually higher than most other places, anywhere that anyone knows of. And I think that perspective is lost in terms of the analysis as to what WAPA is doing. So basically what you're saying is that WAPA is actually taking the lead, and is advanced more than any other territories or any other places. So that's something that I think is very revelatory. I do want to talk about the solar hot water program.
Yes,
I know that Barbados was the leader in terms of solar hot water penetration.
Yes.
And what has WAPA learned from Barbados, and how is the solar water program going here?
Well, Barbados definitely was a leader. They put in a program. They also put in legislation that required solar water heaters, and we kind of model the system from some of their experiences. It's a combination of efforts from the Energy Office, ourselves, legislature, Senator Hill, I believe, was a big proponent of it. And we went and we put a project in place where customers can get solar water heaters, the homeowners, and they can finance it on their power bill. There'll be enough of a savings, is what we anticipate, to where they can pay for the water heater and still have a savings from their previous bill. Electric water heater can be some 20–25% of your power bill. So it's a significant savings that every consumer that owns their home can realize, and I recommend anybody that hasn't done it to make sure they go ahead and put in for the program. It's an excellent program, and it's something that really has a benefit to the utility bill. Everyone that I've spoken with that has done it can talk about how much the bill has dropped. I mean, I don't have a solar water heater in my home. They said I'm doing something a little more drastic than that pretty soon, but I turn mine off. Mine might be on 4 hours a day. When I get up in the morning, I turn it on. After the showers are done, I turn it off. I come back home, there's still hot water, it won't move back on. I have to put it on for 2 hours in the night as well, and that's it. So you might get 4 hours out of my water heater in a day. And I expect that anybody that wants to affect their bill can either take that kind of approach or go straight to the solar water heater approach. But there's ways that we can all help ourselves through conservation. And that's the number one way you can affect your bill immediately.
So in a sense, I mean, WAPA has gotten involved in the solar water heater business in a sense that people are paying for their solar water heater through their WAPA bill.
Yeah, and there's a rebates also through the Energy Office. Yeah.
Right. My question is this, and this is a question I have for you out of personal interest, because I travel around the Caribbean and I've looked at PV, photovoltaics, solar energy, and the price point for PV in terms of an average homeowner sometimes is exorbitant. And I know that there needs to be some type of financing mechanism for this. Do you envision WAPA possibly getting involved in some type of PV program or solar energy program where WAPA may be, because you're in the business of providing electricity,
right?
And so it's not just oil, it's not just, so how could WAPA be involved in a financing program for the average consumer so that they would be able to, pay through their WAPA bill for their solar panels?
Well, and it's when we talk about the average customer, the reason that we went the approach of getting 10 megawatts to the grid is to get the average customer. The average customer is the homeowner, unfortunately, in our island. So when you do plant programs that the homeowner can take advantage of, and that's where you do your focus, well, you have to have some of your programs there. There are many that will be left out and not seeing the same benefit because they don't own their home, they're renting and whatnot. So when you take solar like 10 megawatts and you put it on the grid, then you benefit every ratepayer, and everybody gets a benefit of it. So we try to do more programs where we put it on the grid and benefit all the ratepayers, because many times when you hear the discussions and you hear the planned protests and different things, nobody's considering that small man that really can't take advantage of many of the programs that are out there. So we try to make sure that we put things in place to where they can get some of the benefits. So that's why we did the 10 megawatts for the grid. We'll do 7.5 to 10 megawatts of wind for the grid, and we'll continue to bring our efforts to the grid. And we may pursue something of that nature at a later date, but I think initially the solar water heating may be the first thing that we do. And then as we get more, as we get the grid price down, I think that with the interconnection, natural gas possibilities, solar, wind, and solar may not be a savings. As you know, the price point can be high sometimes with solar, but I believe that when I look at it, I have to look at it for the next 20 years as well. And I expect oil to go to unbelievable amounts over that period of time. So I know we can get a present value savings by making a move to renewables, and then the benefit to the environment is there as well. So that's kind of the direction we're taking right now.
Yeah, I mean, we know that the price of solar keeps going down every 6 months, and also the price of oil, you know, is just so volatile we can't control it. And I know that a lot of people who are interested in renewable energy are not only interested in the price, but also in the consistency of the price, right? And the fact that they know what to expect in terms of if they do end up financing a solar panel system for $20,000, they know that their monthly payments will be a set fixed rate. And that is more interesting to a lot of business people than a fluctuating price where it's a certain price, you know, this month, and then 4 months later it's 20% higher, and it completely messes up their whole budget.
Mutual funds versus stock market.
Exactly. So let's talk about now one thing before we get into some of the community programs that WAPA is involved in, and some of the programs that you've initiated. Let's talk about your relationship with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory.
Okay. That EDIM program I mentioned earlier, it comes with technical support from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. So we have this partnership with them through the EDIM program where they'll provide technical support for all of our needs, whether it's they were involved in interconnection. We had 3 members from NRL involved in the evaluation. They're involved in the solar RFP evaluation, helped create the RFP. Same thing, we're doing interconnection standards. They're involved in that, actually funding the creation of an interconnection policy. So they're very heavily involved. There's a energy roadmap that we have created that talks about how we get to our goal of 60% by 2025. They're vital in that process. They give a lot of technical support for us, a lot of expertise. There's a gentleman they gave us for the interconnection that has done probably some of the most work in this arena in the world, and just, you know, the caliber of individuals they bring to the table is really a benefit, and that's one advantage we have over many of the islands. Of course, we being a U.S. territory, we don't qualify for several of the fundings that many other islands get as well. So we're kind of a disadvantage in some of those areas. I go to meetings and I hear how the U.S. government gave this island country $50 million to do so and so. And I'm blown away because we don't get that kind of support. Right. So we're kind of catch-22. Most of the grants in the U.S. start at 250,000 people and higher. We don't qualify in that regard. So we're kind of left out of some of the possible funding. But we did have the benefit of this EDIM program. We did get a grant funding from the Department of Energy for interconnection feasibility study. We had some stimulus funds that came into the territory for some of the energy programs. Our LED lights that we put up were funded by our funds, stimulus funds. So I'm not complaining.
Okay. Let's talk about what WAPA is doing in the community.
You know, I'm very proud of our efforts in the community. It's something that's really not known to the extent in which we give ourselves to the community. I mean, first of all, the employees of the Water and Power Authority are your neighbors, your coaches, your baseball, football coaches, your umpires, your community leaders. There's 600 plus employees in the Water and Power Authority in the territory. They're involved in every facet of the community that you can imagine. We have some adopted schools on all 3 islands, elementary schools that we give time, whether it's helping with reading to the kids or giving our expertise, whether it's tutoring math or helping donating supplies or whatever the case may be. We do that for
I know you talked about you give time, but I mean you actually instituted something very specific for the workers in terms of the time they can take off to deal with mentorship. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, there's a junior achievement program here, and junior achievement is a national program. They're looking for volunteers, companies to give employees time to go mentor and work with students. This was on a junior high level. And I believe we gave 16 to 20 employees an hour off a week for this purpose. So they would go during the work hour, during the school day, to the schools. I myself did it, two parties of two part number two. You go into the classes and you go through and teach the kids on things like economics, managing money, saving, education, what do you do, how do you better yourself. It's a great program. You start off, the kids are a little warm at first, and then they get excited, and then the teacher tells you they're looking forward to the time slot that you're coming, and you kind of get a chance to give back to the community and teach them, how they can better themselves and prepare themselves. And if the teachers get into it, you meet some of the parents out to talk about what the kids came home and told them about what they learned from you that day. And it's a rewarding program. So we give the employees about an hour a week to do it. We just got the documentation in this week that the program is starting again within the next few weeks. So we'll be getting back down to Cancran, and we go to Cancran for this program.
So why is it important for WAPA to even be involved in this? I mean,
it's our community. This is a public utility. If we don't give back, who will? And we used to have a community where it was a community raising every child. And when we don't get back to that point, we're going to be in loads of trouble here. We're already having some trouble by not having that approach already. So we have to play a role in getting the community, to the point to where we have a workforce here that anyone can bring a business here and have no concerns about how they're going to staff their business opportunity. Or WAPA ourselves, we have a scholarship program. Mm-hmm. This will be year 20 coming up. Mm-hmm. Every year we give 2 4-year scholarships and 2 2-year scholarships to local Virgin Islanders here that go study abroad and come back and work with the Water and Power Authority. Mm-hmm. Almost our entire engineering department is made up of these scholarship recipients.
I think the director of energy here actually was a beneficiary.
Yes. Carl Knight was a WAPA scholarship recipient. Worked at WAPA for about 8-9 years before moving on to the political arena and where he's working now. But we have a vast amount of either engineers that are here with the authority or working abroad, working with companies like Siemens and whatnot that are scholarship recipients, came back, either stayed, gave the time and stayed, or decided to move on and do other things. But it's a great program. It's a way that we know we're going to get qualified engineers coming back to the authority. And we have some of the best engineers. This is my 4th power company that I've worked for. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine, I don't know that I've worked at a place with more talent than this place that I work right now. And I was very much in love with the last company I worked for in Griffin, Georgia. Developed a bond there. It was kind of a different experience because Griffin's a different place. It's not a place where you expect a young black man to be running a utility. But I got there and we became very close-knit. When I left, they had a reception in City Hall for me. It was that kind of a relationship. But here is a lot of talent. We're not focused or isolated on one aspect of a business. Everybody learns the entire business. Our substations here are state-of-the-art, and they're designed by our engineers. Wow. It's a lot of work that's been done through the scholarship program.
Now, I know that in terms of talent and nurturing the talent, that WAPA is also involved in a science contest or something?
Yeah, the science fair. Every year there's one here. We sponsor it from its inception. It's one of the things we look forward to on an annual basis, the Science Bowl. And it's a good program. Mr. Walters is the head of that, and he's done an excellent job of making sure he finds funding for that. We do our sponsorship, but he does an excellent job for the kids, and it's exciting every year to look forward to that.
And I know that there's also a budding program with the University of Virgin Islands for internships in terms of green work that WAPA is doing. Could you just talk about the importance of something like that?
Well, we're excited about that possibility. You know, we have our summer program where we have from 16-year-old high school students to college students that come in and work. But every opportunity to get more college students in, get them a chance to see a technology. I was a summer student at the Water and Power Authority, so you can fall in love with a discipline just by being a summer student working there and getting a chance to see what actually exists for opportunities. There's everything from engineering to accounting to financial, technical, laboratory, the micro lab, on the water side. My first assignment at WAPA was in the water department. So I have a belief that summer internships are vital. When someone graduates from college or graduate school, it's a shame that they don't have any experience to speak of it. It makes it tough to get out into the workforce, but if they have experience, whether from a summer internship or some kind of co-op program or whatever, it works best for them. It makes them a better student when they're in school, as now they can see the application of their studies in actual real life situations. And it's better for the Virgin Islands because now we have a better workforce, a better pool of talent that we can all tap into and make this place, because it's only going to get more and more challenging.
Now, I have two closing questions for you, which I ask all of the people who I interviewed is, how would you, Hugo Hodge Jr., the man, like to be remembered 100 years from now? And how would you like, that's a separate question from, how would you like your work with WAPA to be remembered in terms of some of the visions that you have for WAPA?
Well, it's funny you asked that question. And I'll start with a little story. A few months ago, I was over at a Tyrus Riley concert on St. John, and the governor's son ran into me. And he's like, "Man, you take abuse on the radio every day. How you deal with it?" And I explained to him that when you're in these positions, you don't ever live for today. If you live for today, it'll drive you crazy. You gotta function as if you're creating a legacy, and realize that legacy is never appreciated in its current time, but always as history. Then you continue to do what you're doing with the understanding that one day everybody will appreciate all the efforts that you brought to the table when you were there. So 100 years from now, I expect that my son and his son or daughter will be able to look back and hear that a lot of the changes that the utility made that has it now sustainable and not dependent for anything but a minimum amount of outside resources for the production of water and power in the territory. That is foundation during this period when we were forced to really be creative because of the price point of oil. And they can look back and they can afford to live here 100 years from now because the sustainable efforts came to fruition, and everything that's being done now would have not been done in vain.
Great. I think that actually answers both of the questions. You tied them both in. Well, those who've been watching this program, I think this has been a monumental program. I think that we're at a historical moment, and the world is changing, and those of us who are innovators and those of us who are creative people are going to find ourselves to be the saviors of the day with real viable solutions for the people. And I'm very fortunate to have the opportunity to talk with somebody who is really in the eye of the storm in terms of the need to be innovative, the need to be able to be creative in their solutions and their approach to problems that exist, particularly in the energy sector and moving towards renewable and sustainable energy. And I do think that this interview has been very educational for the young people out there in terms of a pathway that they can take, the responsibilities that you get when you do get older, and the decisions that you make in your life to be able to handle power responsibly. And that is the whole goal of this show, and that's why it's called Lightworkers, is for people to be able to work in the light and to be able to do things that would change the world as we know it for the better. So Hugo, I thank you for making yourself available for this interview. I know there's so many things you could have been doing with your time, but I do think that it was important for you to be seen by the public in this light, and also for the public to see you and to see what type of person you are and what your visions and your plans are for the Caribbean, for the Virgin Islands, and for the utility company here. So I thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
All right.